The UK has one of the biggest economies on Earth. It's a global financial hub. Unemployment is relatively low. On paper, things look fine. And yet, millions of people living in the UK feel like life is getting harder every single year. So how does an economy work while everyday life doesn't? That's the real question, and the answer sits in the gap between economic performance and lived reality. Let's start with the headline numbers. In 2024, the UK economy returned to growth. After a brief technical recession, GDP rose again, signaling that overall economic output had stabilized. According to Reuters, the economy expanded in late 2024, helping the UK avoid a prolonged downturn. This matters because GDP is the metric governments, markets, and media use to decide whether an economy is working. The UK also remains one of the world's largest economies, part of the G7, and a major exporter of services like finance, law, consulting, and insurance. London alone handles a huge share of global financial flows. Employment supports this picture too. Roughly 75% of working-age adults in the UK have a job, placing the country close to the OECD average. If you stop here, the conclusion feels obvious. The economy works. But this is where the numbers quietly stop lining up with real life. Here's the first crack. While total GDP rose, GDP per person actually fell. Reuters points out that once population growth is factored in, economic output per individual declined. That distinction matters more than it sounds. GDP tells you how big the pie is. GDP per person tells you how much pie each person gets. And in this case, the pie got slightly bigger, but it was divided among more people. This is one of the reasons people feel confused when they're told the economy is improving, but their own situation hasn't changed. Growth exists. It just doesn't show up where people expect it to. And that leads directly to the UK's most persistent issue. Productivity is the amount of value produced per hour of work. It's not flashy, but it's one of the strongest predictors of long-term living standards. And this is where the UK has struggled. For more than a decade, productivity growth in the UK has lagged behind comparable countries. According to the Financial Times, weak investment, aging infrastructure, and underperforming sectors have all contributed to sluggish gains. Here's why that matters in real terms. When productivity grows, wages can rise without causing inflation. When productivity stalls, wage growth stalls too. So even when people are employed, and even when GDP rises, paychecks don't stretch much further than they used to. The economy moves forward. Living standards don't. Now zoom into daily life. Data from the UK's Office for National Statistics consistently shows that the cost of living is the #1 concern for households. This isn't abstract anxiety. It's about basics. Food prices rose sharply during the inflation surge. Energy bills spiked. Rents climbed. And even after inflation slowed, prices didn't return to old levels. They just stopped rising as fast. So while official figures began talking about recovery, many households were still adjusting to permanently higher costs, with incomes that hadn't kept pace. And nowhere does this tension show up more clearly than housing. Housing is where economic success and daily life collide. A Financial Times analysis found that in many parts of the UK, only around the top 10% of earners can comfortably afford to buy a home. What this means in practice is simple. For most workers, even those with stable jobs, home ownership is no longer a realistic expectation without inheritance, family support, or extreme financial strain. This isn't just about prices rising. It's about prices rising far faster than wages. On top of that, British homes are smaller, older, and often lower quality than those in many comparable countries, according to international comparisons. So people are paying more for less space with less security. An economy can grow while housing becomes increasingly unreachable. That's exactly what happened. Here's where headline numbers become actively misleading. While averages suggest stability, the distribution tells a harsher story. Reuters reports that over 6.8 million people in the UK are now living in very deep poverty, meaning they struggle to afford essentials like food, heating, and basic clothing. This isn't about unemployment alone. Many people in deep poverty are working. It's the result of low pay, high housing costs, and limited financial buffers, pressures that GDP simply doesn't capture. If you want to know how life actually feels, you don't look at output. You look at well-being. The Ipsos Life in the UK index tracks financial security, trust, social cohesion, and optimism. And despite periods of economic growth, overall quality of life scores have largely stagnated. In other words, people don't feel like they're moving forward. Not backward enough to call it collapse, but not forward enough to feel progress. And that's a uniquely uncomfortable place to be. Here's the reframe. The UK economy works because it's strong in sectors that generate large amounts of GDP, that is, finance, services, trade, and global capital flows. These sectors can thrive even when wages stagnate and living costs rise. But life doesn't work for many people because productivity gains are weak. Wage growth lags behind costs. Housing absorbs a huge share of income. Public services are under pressure. Well-being isn't improving. This isn't a paradox. It's a mismatch between what we measure and what we live. The UK economy isn't fake, and people's struggles aren't imagined. Both are real. They just exist on different layers. GDP tells you how much a country produces. It doesn't tell you whether people can afford homes, feel secure, or believe their future will be better than their past. Until economic growth translates into higher productivity, rising wages, affordable housing, and better well-being, this gap will remain. The economy will keep working, and everyday life will keep feeling like it doesn't.